Okay, so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Why am I discussing this issue now? Well, I spent a month or more reporting a story about his campaign that I think about aspects of his now um, aborted campaign that I think deserve a bit broader attention. So and you can go to mtracy.net, that's Tracy with an E.net, if you want to read the whole thing. I'm not going to belabor you with every last detail. It's quite long and intensive. But here's the point that I wanted to make and draw out and bring more people's attention to. You'll recall that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., starting in October of 2023, withdrew from the Democratic presidential primaries that he initially claimed to be running in, and decided to declare that he was running an independent campaign. And lo and behold, perhaps based on the strength of his vaunted surname or for whatever other reason, because a lot of credulous podcasters brought him on and just showered him with awe and kindness because they were so enamored of his familial credentials. He did become, according to a good deal of polling, the most formidable third-party candidate since Ross Perot in 1992. And Ross Perot in 1992 made a huge electoral impact. There were points in the 1992 campaign in which Ross Perot was actually polling ahead of both Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, so it looked like he could actually win the election outright. And there hadn't been anything really close to formidable as a third-party candidate in all the years that passed since 1982 until this year, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. declared his independence and was going around soliciting contributions, donations, to build a groundbreaking, earth-shattering third-party movement that, according to him, would challenge and dislodge the two-party, quote-unquote, duopoly. He used that term himself on many occasions. So how did Robert F. Kennedy Jr. seek to get himself on the ballot in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia? Because it's a very Byzantine process. It's almost arduous beyond belief to even get oneself in a position to get on the ballots in all 50 states plus DC. But RFK Jr. argued, perhaps with some legitimacy, that he was uniquely positioned to surmount those hurdles and get on all 50 state ballots plus DC. It's 51 ballots, actually. And so one of his strategies was to, in some states, form a new party called the We the People Party that was basically just organized around his outsized, adulated persona. But in other states, he went around to existing minor parties and petitioned those minor parties for their presidential nomination. So if a minor party in a certain state already has ballot access because it has contested previous elections and gathered enough signatures and gone through the process to get themselves on the ballot, what he tried to do was get them to offer up their nomination for president so that he wouldn't have to go through the rigmarole of the massive effort that it takes to get on certain state ballots as an independent candidate. So when he dropped out of the race in August and endorsed Trump, I think rather melodramatically, I thought one thing that I was curious about and that I didn't see much coverage of was what has been the reaction to this turn of events by the minor parties whose nomination he saw and received. So I did something fairly simple. I went and interviewed a bunch of the heads of these minor parties. And here's an example of what one of them told me. So this is Jim Rex. He's the founder and one of the leaders of the South Carolina Alliance Party. Again, these are minor parties, so you might not have ever even heard of them. They're not electoral juggernauts, but they did have enough infrastructure in place that RFK strenuously sought their nomination for president. So here's what he told me. Jim Rex is the head of the Alliance Party in South Carolina. Quote, swindled is not too strong a word for what some of them have said their feelings are. And he was talking about members of his minor party, the Alliance Party, reacting to the withdrawal from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was proposing to these minor parties was that he was going to have this groundbreaking independent campaign that disrupts the two-party duopoly that many of these parties were founded specifically to oppose and to dislodge in their primacy over the U.S. electoral system. And Rex in South Carolina says that some of his members thought that they had been swindled. Because what did RFK Jr. do? He ended up joining the very duopoly that he had previously been purporting to denounce, because he was very aggressive in his denunciations of the Republican Party and Trump as his independent candidacy wore on. Also, obviously, leveling very harsh critiques of the Democratic Party. But if you're talking about overturning a duopoly, that consists of two parts. That's the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But now RFK Jr. is a surrogate for the Republican Party. He's going around campaigning for Trump, has an event tomorrow in Georgia, and he has attempted now to funnel the resources that he accumulated over the course of his independent candidacy to burnish one prong of the two-party duopoly that he had been previously claiming he was dead set on overthrowing. So Jim Rex, the founder of the South Carolina minor party, told me that his membership was of two minds. Some of them were of the belief that they had been swindled by RFK Jr. Others said that they just, according to his characterization, they just, quote, believe in him so much as a person, it's almost cultish, which is ironic because it looks like he's joining a cult. So this is not my words. This is the words of one of the parties, one of the heads of the parties, chairs of the parties, founders actually, whose nomination for president RFK Jr. previously sought. Now, he's saying that factions of his membership feel that they've been swindled, or they have such a personal devotion to RFK Jr. that they'll go along with anything he does, even if it means discarding the anti-two-party logic of his campaign and subsuming it into one of the two major parties. And here's another party whose head I interviewed. This is a gentleman by the name of Doug Dern. He is the head of what's called the Natural Law Party in Michigan. So this is a swing state. This is a critical state. And Doug Dern had put in the work, the really serious, intensive work that is required to even retain viability for a minor party. Now, again, I'm not arguing, and nor would he, that the Natural Law Party in Michigan is some kind of electoral behemoth. It's not. But it did have the infrastructure in place whereby they could offer a candidate its nomination, and then they would be entitled to appear on the Michigan ballot, which is crucial, and then eliminate a lot of the legwork that RFK Jr. would have had to do if he was just on his own attempting to qualify for ballot access. So as he told me, that Doug Dern feels like RFK kind of used us. I kind of feel like he used us, Dern said. And if he was allowed to withdraw from the Michigan ballot, which he might now not be, or he's almost certainly not going to be able to do because he missed various deadlines, and court rulings in Michigan have found that he is required to remain on the ballot even though he attempted to withdraw. But if he were able to withdraw, according to Dern, he would have killed this party. Our party would be dead, Dern told me. Our party would be no more. And I talked to other party leaders as well who echoed similar sentiments, but those are the two that I just want to focus on now. And so here's my, I guess, quandary. For something like 10 months, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was claiming that he was incredibly, uniquely, and historically well-positioned to mount an unprecedented challenge to the two-party system, at least as formidable a challenge, at least as formidable a challenge as Ross Perot in 1992, if not more formidable, because he had gotten a lot of notoriety around his candidacy, particularly from the credulous podcasters who just buttered him up and loved to hear his fables about his dynastic legacy. And then what does he do? He turns on a dime and screws over these parties. So not only was his initial claim to be running this magnificently historic independent candidacy false, not only did that pretense for his campaign prove to be false, he undermined the electoral and organizational prospects of these minor parties. The South Carolina Alliance Party petitioned to withdraw RFK from the ballot because they determined that he had reneged on his commitments to them, which he did. And this gets to the heart of why I was always more skeptical than some might have expected about the RFK candidacy, because I always found it to be fundamentally fallacious. Okay, he was obsessively promoting his family legacy as one of his main reasons for running. He was always invoking his father and uncle. Why it is that having one's father and uncle shot in the 1960s is a big qualifier to become president, I never quite understood, but a lot of people were into it. And then, once he launches his independent candidacy, he starts going after Trump as well as Biden. Biden was the nominee at the time. I can pull up for you right now, in May, RFK Jr. submitted a complaint to the Federal Elections Commission alleging that Biden, meaning the Biden campaign, CNN, and the Trump campaign had all colluded with one another to illegally exclude him from that first fateful CNN debate where Biden infamously couldn't function, and that led to him being switched out unceremoniously with Kamala Harris. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was trying to get on the debate stage, and he was claiming that he was being impeded from doing so through an illegal collusion scheme participated in not just by the Biden campaign, the Democrats, and not just by the corporate media in the form of CNN, but also by the Trump campaign. So one of the very simple questions that I would love to put to him, meaning RFK Jr., if I had the opportunity to do so, is, do you still allege that the Trump campaign colluded illegally against you, even notwithstanding you're now going around campaigning for him? There's never been a really good answer to that. He just turns on a dime, and I'm sorry to say, but he does have a segment of his worshipful followers who are just so enthralled by his pedigree and by who he is as a person that they don't even have the slightest thought to interrogate any of these contradictions or inconsistencies. I've never seen such an inconsistency in a candidate. RFK Jr., and I did get a chance to ask him about this when I had a brief encounter with him at the first presidential debate when he was there as a Trump surrogate on September 10th, and it was recorded for System Update. But I asked him, back in May, so not a lifetime ago, just a few months ago, he was denouncing Trump as having been partially culpable for causing the Ukraine war. You can pull up the tweet, go to my article and look at it yourself. He was saying that, look, Trump is intolerable because he continues to brag about arming Ukraine. RFK Jr. said, if you think that a Trump second term is going to be meaningfully different from a Trump first term, you're engaged in wishful thinking. You're essentially delusional. And then he just has a couple of private consultations with Trump, apparently, decides that all is forgotten, all is forgiven. His denunciations of the first Trump term have no less merit in August or September than they did in May or June when he was making them. And it all gets memory hold. But I did ask him, RFK Jr., about his endorsement of Trump in light of what he had denounced Trump for doing in the very recent past, meaning being partially culpable for causing the Ukraine war and bragging about arming Ukraine. And all RFK would say is that, his views changed because they had some private discussions. Okay, people can have their views change, but if you're not going to be forthcoming with any concrete details, and you're just going to throw in the garbage can everything you have been saying while you're going around soliciting money for this campaign and try to build up a national infrastructure to get on every 50-state ballot, and then all of a sudden you decide to just funnel it into the Republican Party's campaign apparatus, I think there's a bit more of an explanation that should be owed, but it has not been forthcoming. So, look, I always thought that the mythological conception of RFK as somehow carrying on the mantle of his martyred father and uncle and putting this quasi kind of anti-establishment spin on the Kennedy family legacy, to me, it was always frankly obnoxious because it was reminiscent, painfully so, of a standard kind of mainstream liberal apologia for the Kennedys that had been ubiquitous for decades, where they venerate this sanctified notion of Camelot with the glamour and the lore and the principled commitment to advancing liberty and equality and freedom and all this stuff. It was the mainstream liberals who usually trafficked in that kind of nonsense. Now, bizarrely, RFK Jr. is gobbling up disaffected, hazily ideological voters who maybe lean more Republican and having them repeat these absurd, I think, flagrantly ahistorical depictions of the Kennedy dynasty, and then using that to bolster the case for Donald Trump, because RFK Jr. is joining Avengers style with Trump to combat the deep state or something. I mean, this is beyond facile. John F. Kennedy drastically escalated the Vietnam War, was obsessed with running assassination programs and regime change in Cuba. He massively strengthened and dumped massive additional funding into the CIA, far from splintering it into 1,000 pieces, which is the quote that RFK Jr. likes to repeat and others repeat it as well. It's just a chronically misused, decontextualized quote where basically the origin of that quote is, and again, go and look in the article if you want further details. Don't take my word for it. Take Seymour Hersh's word for it, because he's my source for the corrective to a lot of this hagiography that is still persistent and enduring with regard to the Kennedys, but now has a different ideological valence because it's a lot of right-wing types who have become newfound converts to the cause of Camelot. It's very bizarre. But JFK, John F. Kennedy, as well as his bagman RFK Sr., who was Attorney General. I mean, imagine if any president today installed their brother as Attorney General and it just got portrayed as some, heartwarming example of like fraternal bonding. It's absurd. JFK was a committed militarist. He ran against Nixon in 1960 by saying that Nixon and Eisenhower had been soft on communism. They weren't dedicated enough to imposing regime change in Cuba. And according to Hersh, JFK got fed to him updates from elements of the CIA that favored his candidacy over Nixon about the preliminary planning of the Bay of Pigs invasion, which came later in April 1961, and that JFK was hyper involved in planning the most intricate details of. So is this a historical digression? Yes, it is, but it's unfortunately relevant now because RFK Jr. is marshaling these fanciful and fatuous conceptions of the Kennedy legacy and then trying to use that to bolster Trump and putting out this claim that RFK Jr. and Trump are going to, join forces and dismantle the deep state. I'm sorry. As I say in the article, if you believe that, I have a bridge in Hyannisport to sell you, maybe a bridge in Chappaquiddick, frankly, to sell you. Glenn on this show played a clip of my interviewing Howard Lutnick at the vice presidential debate earlier this month, where Lutnick, who is the co-chair of the Trump transition team, very proudly declared that he is finding people with the deepest and most long-standing experience in the national security state to staff the next government. And oh, by the way, his partner, who's helping him very assiduously in doing this, is Jared Kushner, which wasn't a shock to me. I mean, Jared Kushner was involved in the first Trump administration as an employee, as a literal White House staff member. Even if he doesn't have a formal job in the second administration, what, you think he's just going to be sitting somewhere twiddling his thumbs, maybe in Saudi Arabia or Qatar, and not have any role in the second Trump administration? That was never plausible. So all I want to impart to people is that have a bit of critical scrutiny when you see a so-called independent candidate who runs for 10 months and receives donations on the grounds that he's going to mount this historic challenge to the two-party duopoly, then joins one wing of the duopoly, throws all of his arguments into the trash can that he'd been making for the preceding number of months, and then becomes a partisan PR agent for one of the very two parties that he was purporting to denounce. That I find to be a bit foolish, and I think people should be a bit more skeptical of that. And so take a look at the article if you want a bit more details.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.